Forum, so we'll make a start.
Good job.
And remind members again to switch off mobile phones. They may interfere with the sound recording system, and the meeting will be videoed. Many members of their obligation to declare any relevant financial or other interest in relation to today's business, and turning down the volume on all tablet devices. We have apologies, Clark, from...
we have apologies from Rosie McCorley, David Hilditch, Karen McKevitt and Dominic Bradley.
Okay. And ask, are there any other apologies? Because everybody else is here.
And Chair, Mr. Washington has to leave. He's going to speak in.
We have the draft minutes of the meeting of the 19th of February, which are at page 5. And our members agree that's an accurate record of the meeting.
Great.
Which brings us on to our briefing from Libraries NI on the savings delivery plans. And if I could refer members to the clerk's memo at page 10 and a copy of the savings delivery plan from Libraries NI, which is at page 12. We also have Libraries NI copy of their opening hours consultation report, which is at page 54. And everybody will have highlighted all the libraries in their own constituency. And I welcome then Irene, Helen and Terry this morning. Thank you. Sure. Irene's the Chief Executive, Helen is the Director of Library Service, and Terry is the Director of Business Support. So thanks for coming this morning, and try to go ahead with your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you members for the invitation to come along this morning to brief the committee on our savings delivery plans. You have a copy of the plans, as Chair said, and associated high-level impacts. So I don't propose to go into detail, but if I might just highlight some of the issues. The plans are based on the assumption that our budget for 15-16 will be reduced by 7.5% compared to the opening baseline in 14-15. And that equates to £2.385 million. The budget still is in draft, pending completion of the department's consultation currently, but we have been told to plan on the basis of 7.5%. And in order to achieve that within that year, we need to begin the process now, because it is quite a long process. At the outset, I want to say that Libraries NI is appreciative of the recognition given by the Minister and the Executive to the important role that libraries play as community hubs and the measure of protection afforded to the public library service, which means that no libraries will close as a result of the draft 15-16 budget. But nevertheless, savings have to be found, and those savings will have implications for service delivery. I want to touch just briefly on each of the 4 plans. The first one is reducing the stock budget. We'll be reducing it by 361,000. The second one is the reduction in library opening hours, saving 1.581 million, largely on staff costs, with some coming also from premises costs and programming. The third one is reducing our planned and response maintenance, saving 195,000. And the fourth one then is really a conglomeration of various smaller budgets, marketing, travel and computer costs and so on, saving £248,000. But just touch on the stock issue first, Chair, because stock is at the heart of our service. Right. The proposed budget for stock in 15-16 is £2.7 million. That equates to £1.50 per head of population. In 14-15, our opening stock budget was £3.061 million, and that equated to £1.70 per head of population. So we're talking 20 pence per head of population less for 15-16. Committee will be aware from your consideration of the public library standards some time ago that that document specifies £2.25 per head of population as the spend that there should be on stock. And even before the current budget cuts, we did highlight to the department that achieving £2.25 was aspirational, albeit extremely desirable in terms of making sure we have a broad range of stock as possible. Stock, as I said, is at the heart of our service. It comprises a wide range of formats: printed material for adults and children, e-books, and laterally as well e-magazines, which are proving really popular, audiobooks, online resources, newspapers, periodicals, a whole range of formats. The continuous household survey in 13-14 showed that 65% of adults cited the traditional function of borrowing, returning or renewing books as the main reason for visiting a public library still. And in the 9 months to December last year, December 14, there were over 4 million issues of printed material. So there is still a big demand for printed material. And while print material is still the predominant medium, particularly for fiction, the use of e-books is growing. We saw a 37% increase in downloads of e-books in the first 9 months of this financial year compared to the previous financial year. And I mentioned our e-magazines. They're proving very popular. We introduced them towards the end of last year, and since November there have been 28,000 downloads of e-magazines. Reducing the stock budget will have an impact on participation levels, with a poorer quality selection of material available in our libraries and less money to invest in growth areas such as the digital and online material, which is proving popular. And that will impact as well on the benefits that might have been realised from the investment in E2, which is our new ICT project, which has the facility to enhance access to online services. Members are aware of the consultation that is ongoing at the moment in terms of reducing opening hours, and that's our second savings delivery plan. It's something that our board has considered very reluctantly, but because of the level of savings required, there isn't any other option. The vast majority of our staff work in frontline posts in the 96 branch libraries and the 2 heritage libraries, the Mellon Centre and the Irish and Local History Library in Armagh. And it's to those libraries that the proposal relates. We're not proposing any changes to the mobile library service. We came, you may recall, to the committee a couple of years ago to brief the committee on a revised strategy for the mobile library service. And I'm pleased to say that that strategy has been operating now for over a year and has proved very successful. Usage of the mobile library service has increased by nearly 27% in the first 9 months of this financial year compared to the previous year after we introduced the new strategy. And this consultation does not relate to mobiles. You will know as well from the previous time we were at the committee that in year we had to make 4.4% cuts and introduce emergency opening hours in some but not all libraries in November. And the savings from that came from the release of agency staff, and those savings will flow through into 15-16, and those emergency hours will remain in place until this consultation is completed and new hours are introduced. But we can't continue with emergency hours long term because really there was no rationale to their introduction other than having to find savings wherever we possibly could at that time. In the interest of fairness and equity across the service, we need to put in place a process to regularise and standardise hours across libraries that are doing similar levels of business. So we've commenced that public consultation exercise in relation to a draft policy which sets out the overarching approach to establishing the opening hours of libraries. And we've also set out in that document the impact of that policy on the opening hours in the context of the 15-16 budget. We've also published a draft Equality Impact Assessment and a draft Rural Impact Assessment, and we're seeking comments on those as well as part of this consultation process. In summary, Chair, the consultation report states that in determining the opening hours of libraries, we will seek to ensure a consistent approach is applied across all libraries, although exceptions may be made for libraries serving areas of substantial social need, and that's because tackling poverty and social exclusion is a key priority both in the programme for government and for DCAL itself. Opening hours will relate to the historic use of a library, so we will base the opening hours on the level of use of a library, and the allocated hours will be used in the way that best meets customer needs. They need to be sufficient to provide a range of opening hours, mornings, afternoons, evenings, weekends, and to allow a minimum range of programmes to be provided in line with our priorities. And obviously they have to be affordable, and we want to make sure they are sustainable as well. In implementing the policy, we're proposing that no library will be open for less than 18 hours a week. Many of our small rural libraries are open for 18 hours a week, and we don't believe that it's feasible for any library to operate below 18 hours. So we've protected those libraries at 18 hours. And quite a lot of them, as I say, are in rural areas. And we're also saying that no library serving an area of substantial social need, and there are 12 libraries in that context, should have its hours reduced by more than 10%. And that means that some of those libraries are band higher than their usage would normally say that they should be. But that's because we are prioritising work in those areas. The consultation document that you have provides a lot more detail around that. The actual pattern of opening hours in each library will be decided during the second phase of this process. Once the board has considered the responses to the consultation and made a decision on the way forward, we will then be placing questionnaires in individual libraries with a range of patterns of opening hours, and we'll be asking the users of that library which pattern best suits their needs. So there will be a second phase of local consultation around the pattern of opening hours. If I could move on, Mr. Chair, then to the third savings delivery plan, which relates to planned and response maintenance. Most of our 98 libraries are in very good condition. We have invested substantially in our library estate over the last few years. Planned maintenance is designed to make sure that they remain so and to prevent longer-term maintenance problems. In the short term, planned maintenance can be cut without a significant impact on frontline services, but it provides poor value for money in the medium term and will prove more costly in the long term to bring those libraries back up again to the standard that the public expect. Response maintenance by its very nature is dependent on a whole range of changeable factors, the weather, breakdowns, etc. And it's difficult to predict how much will be required in year. But what we're aiming to do is to seek to maintain a minimum level of planned and recurrent maintenance spend during 15-16. Firstly, because we have no capital budget as yet for next year. And secondly, because we want to ensure that if at all possible, no library is forced to close, even temporarily, because of maintenance problems. And finally, in terms of the plans, our final plan relates to a combination of measures, including reducing the budgets for travel, marketing, computer costs, vehicles. And I don't propose to go into detail in those, Chair, they're in the documentation. But just to say that in putting together these savings delivery plans, we've looked at all our areas of spend to try and find savings. In conclusion, Chair, if I could just say, I realise that what I've said may come across as quite negative. And it is very disappointing, of course, for us that the plans that we had to actually develop and enhance services have had to be curtailed because of budget issues. But I don't want to end on a negative note either. I want to emphasise that within the resources that are available to us, public libraries, as vital and valued spaces, will continue to offer as comprehensive a range of services, events and activities as possible to engage, involve and connect people of all ages, cultures and backgrounds, and provide them with opportunities to improve and enhance their lives. Our network of 98 libraries is a valuable resource located at the heart of communities. 89% of the population live within 2 miles of a branch library or a mobile library stop. That means, I think, that there are tremendous opportunities for other organisations, particularly in the statutory sector, to use that network to improve their access at a local level to their services. And that in turn would contribute to sustainable libraries and also to efficient use of public buildings. And that's all I want to say at this stage. We're very happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks indeed, Irene. Looking at the proposals there, you're confident that the reduction in the opening hours will meet the required reduction in the budget, along with the other issues that you've raised?
We have modelled this here, and we believe that if our assumptions turn out to be correct, yes, that is the case. We have made various assumptions in this process, including that our budget will only be cut by 7.5%. We've made assumptions around ongoing costs in terms of oil and heating and those kinds of things which have come down in price. We've made assumptions around that any redundancy process will be funded externally. So we've made various assumptions, but if those assumptions are realistic, and we have agreed all those assumptions with the department, then this year we'll deliver the required savings, and we'll be able to live within budget.
Okay, thank you. Gordon?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for your presentation this morning. Just a couple of things that would be important we put on record: the good work of the NI libraries, and we appreciate it very much in Northdown. Obviously, Bangor's extensively used, and Hollywood Library as well. And I think the words community hub, Irene, you mentioned, I think that's important. And I believe both of them do an excellent job in relation to being community hubs. Just on that point, the use of the rooms within the libraries, with the restricted opening hours, are they going to be affected, the accessibility to the public for the use of rooms for public events? Is that going to be affected by the
meeting rooms and
yeah.
The meetings rooms will still be available outside of library opening hours. However, the cost of hiring the rooms are higher outside of library opening hours if we have to provide a member of staff, a caretaker or whoever who wouldn't normally be there. We pass that cost on to the organisation that's booking the room. Obviously, there will be occasions where the library opens as part of a much larger community event, and that would be looked at on a one-off basis and as part of the library's contribution to that community event.
So you intend to be flexible on that and work with communities? That's great. Just, Chairman, the other issues about stock. Will this be a real challenge if you lose your funding for stock or part of it in relation to trying to refresh the stock? And
Stock is at the heart of our service, as I said. You know, the vast majority of people still say they come to a library to borrow return books, and reducing our stock budget will have implications for participation levels in the library service. It will be particularly difficult around online resources and digital resources, and I mentioned the fact that e-books, you know, we now provide downloadable e-books, free downloadable e-books, and they're proving really popular with people. We're also providing free downloadable e-magazines, and there's something like, I think, 250 magazines that are now, and periodicals that are now available electronically just by being a library member, free to download everything from Hello to The New Scientist. You know, so it's a really broad range of magazines. So, you know, it will be difficult as far as making sure that we can continue to provide that broad range of stock. I think as well there's an issue longer term in terms of making sure, because libraries, you know, libraries are also about collecting material for posterity, and there is an issue if perhaps we miss out on something and then it goes out of print and we can't buy it again. So there are a whole range of issues associated with not being able to buy as much stock, and it will have impact on some of the more minority interest material, because we'll need to try and focus our budget as well.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Oliver McMullen.
Thank you, Chair. Can I congratulate you on your report? Can I also congratulate you on the fact that the mobile service won't be touched? You know, that's a lifeline to rural areas out there, and I think that should be highlighted more, because that's really, really important. That when you did say at the end of your report, Erin, that other people to use the libraries, how do you see the new council structures and the council community plans in the sense that how do you see yourselves being part of that?
Chair, I think the issue for us there is as I've said, we have 98 libraries. We have libraries in every council area. We have structured our service on the basis of areas which are coterminous with the new councils, and we did that right back in 2009, hoping that we would get it right, and we did. And we have actually, in response to the consultation that has been underway about statutory partners in the community planning process, we have responded to that, saying that we believe that because of the fact that we are in there in every community, that we are community hubs, that we're used by people from all sections of the community, that we should actually be a statutory partner in the community planning process. And we have been making contact with councils around that. And I understand that the new councils are they're very, very busy at the moment. There's a lot going on with all the move in April, but we certainly do think that we have a key role to play there in that community planning process, and would want to be involved with the new councils in that.
Just quickly, the last bit is, when you say the stock being reduced, that's unfortunate, but to the stock that you have there for disability and special needs, will that still be kept up? That's again very important for that sector of the community.
We will have to reduce all our stock budgets accordingly, but we will be, we will still be trying to buy, for example, audiobooks, which are very, used very heavily by people perhaps who have visual impairments and so on. But one of the big things now as well is because of the digital online services that we have and the e-books and so on, we have downloadable audiobooks and so on as well. So there are different ways now as well of meeting the needs.
Thank you.
Thank you. Basil McRae.
Thank you. Yeah. So, a couple of issues. Just you mentioned a saving of approximately £1 million in staffing, but a cost of 1.6 million to actually implement that. Where are we in terms of getting some comfort that that 1.6 million will be available?
We don't have any comfort about that at the moment at all, other than we were told by the department to plan on the basis that redundancy costs would be met centrally. But we haven't had any information from anybody really since then, Perry, you might be, as to exactly when that would become available and if it will become available.
We have been in close contact with the department, particularly the Director of Finance, but he doesn't have the information from DFP yet about when that monies will be available and whether or not our process for reducing staff will be appropriate.
And if we have reduced staff because it actually, in your risk analysis, you do put down that there's quite a big impact in terms of delay. I think you were saying, Aaron, at the start that you wanted to start now. How aware are DFP of the stresses on you in that regard? I mean, have you spoken to them, or? Well,
we don't speak to DFP. That's through the department. But Terry has been keeping in very close contact with the finance department in DCAL. Around these issues. The issue for us is we're planning on the basis of funding being made available mid-year, September, October, to release staff, and that's why we're starting this consultation process now, so that we can start to identify staff as we move through. If it doesn't become available mid-year, then we have to find those savings somewhere else, and so we have to have a plan B. And unfortunately that does mean then looking again at our stock budget, and perhaps having to take more money out of our stock budget. So there's the assumptions, as Terry said, are the assumptions the department told us to work on. But at the same time, we are having to think about alternatives.
Your stock budget, though, is 2.7 million at the moment. So if you're to find 1.6 million out of it, I mean, it just means we'll have no books.
Well, it devastates the stock budget.
So I just think that there's something that we need to do, and we'll maybe talk about it after, about getting you some clarity sooner rather than later, because of the plans receiving that. A couple of issues that I noted. Marketing reduced £68,000. I do think that there's an issue with e-books, that people are still not really aware that they're there and how you do it. And I just wonder if you need to do doing structural change. Like what you've really done is pared back, and you've had to do that. But I think we need structural change, and I'm wondering how you're going to do that without informing people, or being able, having the resources to inform people.
Certainly, in terms of marketing, there are planned budget reductions. We currently have a very small marketing team, and it's difficult to see how that team could be pared back further. We use all the marketing platforms available to us, PR, media, social media, and so on. But it is a small operation, and you're right, there's a big job to do to get the message.
I mean, I was quite impressed when I went in to Lisburn where we were all there. Even got the chair involved in our supporting libraries.
And thank you for that, everyone. Yes, that was really good.
So I wasn't. But I have to say, I think there's an issue that there's been a significant capital investment, if I remember correctly, in e-books and such like, and that is potentially at risk if we don't follow through.
Yes, there is always a risk in that kind of a situation, and I suppose one of the things we want to try and do is to find other ways of getting the message across. It's why we're becoming much more social media savvy as well, in terms of Twitter and Facebook and so on, with our, individual branches now being on on social media as well. So we're trying to look at other ways. We were to have had this year a big marketing campaign around E2 and around ebooks and so on, but because of the in-year budget cuts, we just had to scrap that. We couldn't go with that, and that was unfortunate. But it was.
So, I've two final points to make on that. Would it be your intention on that to try and ask the department for support for in-year monitoring? I mean, would you?
Yes.
Absolutely, yes. It's a normal process that we would have pressures and we would bid for in-year monitoring.
I mean, I do think that in terms of perhaps sharing with the committee when you're doing that, I know there's a formal process that you go through, but I think there would be support from what I can gather if just whenever you're doing, if you could look at. And the final point I want to put to you, the issue about reduction in fuel costs and things which are quite significant, but there is always a danger that the oil price is going to go back up.
There's always a danger, but it's difficult to forecast if that's going to happen or not. And generally in these things we forecast current process. Obviously, if oil prices go up again, that will create a pressure, and we will have to manage that within our budget.
But it's quite, if I get it right, it's quite a significant. You're looking for, was it 348,000? Did I see somewhere? There's a big.
That's based on current levels. If current levels continue on, we can deliver that no problem. If price of oil is up, then that will create a pressure, yes. But I'm not forecasting that it will go up unless you know differently.
And I suppose one of the things we're assuming as well is that if we reduce the opening hours of our libraries somewhat,
yes,
then there will be less heating oil because we won't be.
You see, that's the point. I'm not sure that you can actually draw a straight line.
No,
on that.
You can't.
But you sort of have to have them heated and yeah.
There's a relationship between.
There is, but these are assumptions that we have to work on. That's what we're planning on at the moment.
Yes, and you're right to plan, but of course, I just see it when people try and reduce. I mean, you have to do what you have to do, but when you have to reduce maintenance budgets, if you get a problem, then you have to fix it, and if heating goes up, and so. Okay, so at least we have a plan, and we'll just have to work off.
And we do try and, I suppose, make sure that we can, as far as possible, manage within that and have a little bit of flexibility and to move budgets around if we need to.
Well, I just say, just to reiterate the point, I do think that we have to look at the structural change to e-books and that, and if you are planning an initiative on that, I'm sure that everybody here would be very keen to support as long as we know when you're doing it. Okay. Chair.
Okay, William Humphrey.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation. Looking through the list, and as the Chair said at the outside of the meeting, I guess most members will look at their own constituencies, and I've had a look through the libraries in North Belfast and Shankill, and I'm relatively content that the hours that we have now are the hours that are going to be there, and that's something which is hugely important, because you mentioned the 12, excuse me, the 12 libraries in areas of high levels of deprivation. I wonder if it would be possible to get the list of those 12.
I can tell you now.
Okay, that would be good, yeah.
I can tell you now. They are Ardoyne, Chichester, Collinglen, Cregan in Londonderry, Falls Road, Hollywood Arches, Shankill, Shantallow, Suffolk, Waterside, White Rock and Woodstock. But I can write to you about those if you.
Yeah, that's good. And I guess there's probably only one or two, if possible, that will be a surprise to people there, and that's an indication. But Mr. McRae talked about the shelfie. I went into the Shankill Library the other Saturday morning for my shelfie, and I have to say, I have a very high opinion of it anyway. And we managed to get into the local press as well. And they all of us there had coffee, and they brought out Bromley apple pies and stuff. And I have to say, I'm sure they paid for them themselves.
I think they probably did actually, because they
I'm absolutely confident.
They tend to do that very much.
So that's over and beyond the Call of Duty, but I want to commend the staff, and I'm a member in that library. But the reality is that when you talk about budgets, I had two groups into my office yesterday, Chairman. I simply wanted to make this point. We are concerned about budgets and having to put some of their staff on protective notice. You're dealing with a different type of problem with budget, failing to agree a budget, and parties need to learn from that. Because it's impossible to govern this place properly, impossible for you to manage your organisation, indeed right across government, properly if we don't agree budgets and if we don't agree them on time. That's simply the point I wanted to make, Chairman. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you.
Thank you. And could I just explain that I was in the library enjoying my reading, and the quietness of the library was disrupted by a disruptive and abrasive voice, which I immediately recognised as possible. Leslie?
You looking for cream in his apple pie, was it?
No, it's just being noisy as usual.
Yes, good morning. Do you have to express an interest in libraries? I always loved books. Not so keen on the E ones, they're okay, but they're not a lasting record. And one of my concerns would be, touched on it, the fact that leaving novels and all that sort of stuff out of it, if you do have a cutback in stock levels, then you can miss a lot of important stuff, which will affect people coming on for generations, and that would concern me. The other big issue that don't cause me concern is this one of redundancies and the voluntary exit scheme. You say you know nothing about it at the moment.
We have a voluntary redundancy scheme within Libraries NI. We have implemented, if we get money this year for voluntary, this will be our 6th tranche of voluntary redundancies within Libraries NI. We have done basically every year since Libraries NI was established. We have, because of restructuring issues and looking at the way forward, we have gone through a voluntary redundancy process.
And you've funded those out of your own revenues?
Some of it has been funded by ourselves, but most of it has been funded centrally through monitoring rounds and that kind of thing.
Business cases approval by DFP.
And it's been part of a bigger...
Sorry, I would just interrupt you there. Done from resources, not from borrowings?
Oh no, it's been done from... No, it's never been borrowings. Well, we don't borrow money. I don't know where it comes. I'm not sure where it comes from at DFP, but the money has come to us from DFP. We don't have to pay it back. But we have implemented our voluntary redundancy scheme for the last 5 years. The civil service scheme, as I understand it, is known as a voluntary exit scheme because there wasn't a voluntary redundancy process in place. We've been told to plan on the basis of the staff that we're released being funded centrally through voluntary redundancy, but we don't know when that money is going to come, if it's going to fund our voluntary redundancy scheme, or if it's going to be the voluntary exit scheme. So there's a lot of questions around that at the moment. Terry has been liaising very closely with the finance director in DCAL in relation to it, but I think the issue is, as I understand it, the civil service scheme is only just opened, so I presume there are still discussions underway about all of this. The issue for us is we need to know fairly quickly, because it does have implications longer term on our budget in 2016 and how much we can save from releasing staff.
The scheme itself, if we were to believe what's been said, will officially be open on Monday. Although I know that several departments have had this scheme for at least a month. You haven't got it yet. I was talking to the HR director in DFP yesterday on particularly interested in how the public servants, in arm's length bodies would be affected. And he effectively said nothing to do with me. I don't know who is going to be doing that, but the figures just don't add up at the moment. We're talking about 2,400 from the civil service, expecting 5,000 for the year, so it's 2,600 to come somewhere else. And if no one else has any details of this, then I can't see how it's going to happen. So it's good to have clarification from you, because that was one of the concerns I would have, that arm's length bodies, haven't yet been really taken on board in this thing, which I think is grossly unfair. Now, the other wee point of interest was the one that Shellen makes, talking about extended opening hours. When you're doing the sums on that, obviously if you're opening for a community, and that's a good thing, you probably have to run the heating plan for the whole building. And I'm just wondering, bearing in mind that that sort of use is, shall I say, infrequent, how can you possibly do that wee budgeting exercise?
We have room hire rates that take into account staffing costs, premises costs and so on, worked out by my expert colleague to my right. So the rates are set taking all of that into account. It can't be an exact science because, for example, last night, I'm based in Omagh Library, all 5 of the meetings rooms were in use by different groups, so those costs are spread across more groups than they would be at other times in other libraries, so it can't be a totally exact science. When I talked about participating in community events, and this was in the context of North Down, I was thinking perhaps particularly of things like the switch on of the Christmas lights, which is such a big event, or Culture Night, and the library's contribution as a community focal point is to open the premises for extended hours at our own expense. But that would be a fairly infrequent activity, but we do believe it's important that libraries contribute to those broader town or village-wide events as far as possible.
But on this, catering for the extra demand from outside, which going to put costs onto yourself, you can ill afford it now, perhaps. Are you thinking of revising the rates that you charge for that use?
We keep those under review, and I should perhaps make the point that there are different rates for community and voluntary sector and for private sector commercial organisations.
Well, it's just that it's highly commended that you do that. You've got to be very careful there. There could be significant costs. And oil costs are really starting to rise, by the way, just to cheer you up.
But the principle is that the additional cost will be covered by the charges made. So that's the budgeting assumption that's made. Sometimes it's not fully covered, sometimes it is fully covered. Overall, there's not much of a variance.
Thank you. There's some interesting information in there around the number of visits and the number of issues per library. Just say that was useful to have because you have a good picture of the level of usage. A couple of queries here on just if you explain in one sentence what this means. This is in regard to premises savings with Lisburn. These premises savings are enhanced by the additional savings that have arisen from the Lisburn City Library PPP PFI benchmarking exercise. What does that mean?
We have one PFI library, which is Lisburn Library.
Yes.
Very fine library it is too.
As are all our libraries. But we have a process where, with the provider of the library that every 5 years we do a benchmarking exercise on the services provided that are included in the financial model. And this year, the timing of that there, we were very lucky because it was just after the oil prices dropped. So we look back over the previous years and we apply the current price to that there and do a benchmarking exercise based on the current price. And whereas previously we had been assuming oil prices would just continue to increase all the time and we had been setting aside monies to cover that, we were very lucky this year to get money back. That was a double benefit to us this year.
That's great, thanks. Also there's a memorandum of understanding between Libraries NI and DARD. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, and is there any potential for funding from DARD for rural libraries? I'm just saying in the context of the fact that, for example, DARD put money into capital sports centres in some rural areas.
The Memorandum of Understanding has been in place with DARD for perhaps 2 years now, and it has led to some additional funding. For example, members might be aware of Libraries NI's Health in Mind project, which is about promoting positive mental health and has reached more than 40,000 people in a 4-year period. DARD, because mental health is obviously high on every department's priority, put extra funding in to enable Libraries NI to provide extra health in mind activities in our rural libraries. In terms of capital, I suppose the way in which libraries have benefited is where the funding has been available through the local action groups. For example, in Crossmaglen Library, where the library is part of the community centre, a cocktail of funding provided through SOAR, the local LAG, led to a refurbishment of that building, which included the library. We part-funded some of the library developments that benefited from the enhancement of the entire library, and a similar principle would have applied in Draperstown, where we got a new library as a result of the European funding being administered through DARD and the local action group.
And in terms of revenue, do you think there's any potential to increase what might be coming from DARD? I can take the point if there's an additional service that they put in, that may cover the cost of that. Do you see that expanding?
Well, we continue to work with DARD and actually with other departments as well, in terms of because we are delivering services. It's back to what I said in the presentation. There's the building. You can come and use our building. So we're continuing to press for funding, towards various issues. But we recognise that everybody's under financial pressure at the moment as well, and it's going to become more difficult to get that kind of funding into the future.
I think an important aspect of our discussions with DARD, and they're certainly not offering us any funding, is, along with other government departments, requiring more and more of their processes to be done online. Cattle movements, all sorts of things have to be done online, and yet there are people who don't have access to broadband, don't necessarily have the IT skills to be completing forms online and undertaking the necessary transactions. So there's a big role for libraries in this digital agenda whereby NI Direct and government services are moving online, because otherwise people are going to get left behind. So, for example, with DARD, what we've done is made sure that our staff in the most rural libraries have had a briefing on the DARD Direct website and can find their way around the AFIS system. They can't complete forms on behalf of farmers and rural dwellers, but they can give them a little bit of support, and they know the helpline number to ring. So that's a model that we can use to work with various partners, but only if the libraries can be open adequate hours to really provide that access.
In terms of the department's arts and culture strategy that started, work has started on it. I understand Libraries NI has got a representation on the steering group for that.
Sure, I sit on the steering group.
That's great. Yeah. Have you any thoughts there about the remit and the working of the group, or the potential, how you see libraries fitting in with this? I know it's a very early stage. Well, we only had one meeting or something.
We've had one meeting, Chair, and that meeting was very much focused on looking at the terms of reference and making sure that we're all clear about the terms of reference for the group, and actually just coming up to speed with the whole discussion that has been ongoing at the moment. But I do think libraries are mentioned in the terms of reference for the steering group, as are museums and a whole range of other organisations. I do believe libraries have a very big role to play in terms of giving people access to arts and culture. And maybe just an example, Chair. March is Creativity Month within DCAL, and this is our programme. This is our programme of events and activities that are happening in libraries during March to celebrate Creativity Month. And there are, it ranges from everything from storytelling to drama to poetry to, a lot of digital material now as well, giving young people opportunities to try out some of the most recent, I don't really understand an awful lot of these things, but things like GarageBand and some of the software in our creative labs. So there's a whole range of things happening there now as well. So libraries are, I personally believe that libraries, as these community hubs and as the focal point in communities and located in areas where there aren't perhaps any other arts and culture facilities, can provide access to, whether it's exhibition space, because most of our libraries now have some exhibition space, whether it's drama, whether it's, there's an opportunity for people who maybe would never think of going to an art gallery or, drama, theatre production or something, to be introduced to it in their local library, and perhaps from that develop interests which are broader.
Well, it certainly afford an opportunity in that if you simply look at how many books go over a counter, you would make one decision about levels of funding. But if you also take into account the fact that DSD benefits because people can use the online to do whatever, DARD because, again, it can be done online, the council because they don't need to build maybe as many facilities for meetings because there's already a meeting place in a library. And it's that added value on top of the books that's crucial. So therefore, across departments, I think there needs to be recognised that they are saving themselves a lot of money. That may not then necessarily reflect in their desire to see lots more money poured into it, because everybody will fight for their own department, but we need a more joined up approach there. Could I just ask one other wee question there? In regard to the Mellon Centre for Migration Studies, you're going down from 30 hours to 22 temporarily. Is that what it's likely to be? What impact do you think that's like 25% or nearly?
If I may, Chair, the 22 hours was as a result of the emergency reduction in opening hours, where we just had to do what we could, remove agency staff and so on. We are consulting on the basis of 35. However, the issue with the Mellon Centre, and we may need to consider it in a slightly different way from the other libraries, is that the new hours that come out of this whole process will be implemented in the autumn. And yet, for the Centre for Migration Studies, its busiest period is over the summer because it's located at the Ulster American Folk Park. So we will need to consider it in a slightly different way, because whilst the reduced 22 hours are barely adequate over the winter period, once the folk park is operating at its summer levels, then 22 hours is really not adequate, and the likely outcome would be more that there would be increased hours in the summer and then reduced hours in the winter, I would suggest, Chair.
Sure, could I just...
No. Oliver first.
Just very quickly, you're aware of the TRIPSY programme? Yes. And I do see there's a role in there for you, excuse me, in the TRIPSY programme through the Department of Agriculture. But if there's something there, you could come back to me on that, because more and more what you've said today, more and more there is a role for the new councils in this community plan. And as you said earlier on, you have to get more use of the libraries. This is where the new councils will come in, where they have to provide services, but it'll be cost effective to the councils where they don't have to provide the building. The building is there, and there could be this cocktail of funding you talk about. You're quite right, and I see the councils as pivotal to quite a lot of the rural dweller. I can't say so much on the urban, I'm sure not, but I know on the rural dweller, the council. But the TRIPSY programme, again, I think that's something that can be used in your cocktail of funding.
And if I may, Chair, the Health in Mind activities that I described were funded through the TRIPSY programme.
Thank you.
Basil?
Thank you. Ulster American Folk Park, the plans that we have in from them suggest that they're going to close that for 4 months in the winter. Mm-hmm. So just your discussion there about the Mellon thing, how does that affect no folk park?
The Centre for Migration Studies is used by visitors to the folk park, but also by a wide range of people who are interested in heritage, coming to do research and so on, like in all our heritage libraries, over and above people who are visiting the folk park for the day. But those coaches that turn up at the folk park do call in at the centre. So there is a relationship, but not a straight line relationship between the folk park's opening hours and what the centre would need to do. But yes, that's a factor that we have to consider.
Okay, just one point I want to pick up back on the energy issue. The one thing that there does seem to be some availability on is capital, particularly financial transactions capital, and that's sort of orientated around energy. And I just wonder if you might be looking at making a pitch to get green or energy conservation messages, because that capital is available. And I think there's an issue, particularly actually in rural areas, where you're trying to get people to take up measures. You might want to lead by example. So the issue is, you could get a payback of 5 years if you have capital, and the capital is available. I just think that you should maybe.
We have looked at financial transactions capital in terms of funding for Belfast Central Library, but it wasn't successful. It wasn't appropriate for that there.
Do you think you could make a business case given on your energy requirements? Because you do have a sort of a central hub, and you could probably do it on a scale, and I think you'd get some sort of support in that.
We'll look at that, yes.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Final one is William Humphrey.
It's just a very brief question, Helen. In response to the Chairman's question about Dard, you mentioned that some funding had come. Do you have an idea of the figure? If you don't have it now, could you furnish us with that figure?
It's 25,000 this year.
I think in the context of the question you asked, it is very small beer.
Yes.
I think there's much more that they could do. Thanks, Chair.
Could you clarify for me the budget for the Centre for Migration Studies? There's an annual report comes out from the Centre for Migration Studies, and they have their own board and so on. I'm not clear on the relationship with yourselves.
Very complicated.
I thought it would be, yes.
You're the expert on
the Mellon Centre for Migration Studies prides itself on being a partnership organisation. There are two main aspects to its funding. One comes through Libraries NI, and Libraries NI funds the library service in terms of the stock, the staff, and so on. And then the director, the lecturer, and the costs associated with their operations are funded by a combination of DCAL and the Scotch-Irish Trust. The annual report mostly reflects the activities and certainly the budgets provided from the Scotch-Irish Trust, but Libraries NI funds the library staff. They are Libraries NI members of staff.
How many staff would be there from the library side?
We have one full-time member of staff there, and then the heritage manager, who also covers County of Londonderry, has some responsibility.
Okay. It's not in this context, but I think in terms of Northern Ireland, we're not punching our weight in terms of all of the potential that's there regarding that whole area. 50 years ago, Northern Ireland had got a better grasp of what was potentially there with Despeal, Eric Montgomery and so on. You get back, get back on it.
4 hour time, Chair.
Thank you for that.
Must be a long way away.
Thank you for that. But there was a greater grasp of it. I think it's become confused and diluted how we approach it. There's no strategic thing to it. It's for another day, another place. Does that fit in at all into I assume it would, into the arts and culture strategy? Or is it? Because
well, it's part of National Museums.
Yes.
There's this cocktail of people who are involved in it, but yes, it would do in that context, I would imagine, yes.
Right.
We haven't got into that kind of level of detail at all yet, Chairman, but museums are certainly in there as well.
Right, okay. Thanks very much indeed. And
thank you.
we will keep an interest in the subject, yes, and we will all be going to Creativity Month.
Yes, and can I just say as well, thank you to all of you who did take part in the Shelfies. It was extremely successful and it has created a lot of interest in the library service, so thank you all very much for that.
Handing these out, will you take them back?
No, I'm leaving them for
Part of
you.
the library stock.
No, I'm leaving those with you.
Yes. When does this have to be back for?
There are no fines associated with late withholding and late.
Good stuff.
Thanks.
That's what I needed.
Right, where do we go?
Library for next week's visit.
Sure, right. Script, right? All right. Okay, thank you. Okay, we've heard the presentation. Are there particular actions we want to take up at this point?
I have one particular one,
Okay.
there, which is the point that Irene was making about not getting information about where the funding was available for redundancies and such like, and as to whether that's included. I do think, just looking at the paper, that the earlier they know, the better the savings, and so maybe we should be writing to, well, first of all, the department, of course, but secondly, we might refer it to the Committee for Finance and Personnel as well, just to say that we can't make these plannings without getting clarity.
Okay.
I had them yesterday with no change, Basil. They didn't know themselves. She'd push it up the line, Chair.
So we write in regard to
Just, I don't know if Peter, if the clerk got it, but Irene actually gave a long, like a quick blast of things I don't know. There's about 6 or 7 things, you can hardly keep up with them. I just think we should maybe encapsulate that particular paragraph, if you can remember, and what was said and that in the letter.
Okay, Oliver?
Yes, and I think it should be flagged up at the importance of the joined up approach that can be made with the new councils. They can be major players in rural councils, even urban councils there, where they can maybe bring something to the table, and as far as funding goes, or use of libraries more than what's been done at the moment.
So we write to the department highlighting that.
Aye, to both departments. If you're writing to the Minister, you need to be writing to, I think it's Mr. Durban, is he in charge of councils?
Yeah.
Yeah. The importance of that, because it does say it, we have to be on outside of the box.
And do you want to follow up on the DART issue?
Yep.
Okay.
Just generally, are we going to put pressure on the department in relation to the priorities, in stock, open hours and so on? Or what way do we intend to go back on, push back on it?
When you say put pressure on about priorities, do you mean about changing priorities or?
No, I think just about the various issues, I suppose, if you were to take, personally I think stock is something that we lobby hard on.
The three things, yes. Stock, once you cut your stock, your people stop going to libraries because they say, well, I've read them all.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. If you're not refreshing, you're not going to attract in customers as such. So I'm looking for your guidance as to how we're going to follow up on this.
Chair, it sounds from what Irene said, and I think the committee will hear it from other arm's length bodies when they come to brief, that the in-year monitoring rounds are going to become a fairly savage process where a lot of inescapable pressures will be brought to the table and where bids will be made for things that were essentially part of core budgets before, such as the need for maintenance. I think particularly was flagged up by Irene Knox, that they are putting a certain amount on hold, and that can be done for small things for a while. But as we've seen at previous monitoring rounds with museums, if you leave it for too long, it becomes substantial and inescapable, and then large amounts of money have to be found at short notice. Chair, what do you want to do?
Sorry.
Chair, I'll just make the point again, and maybe in the room. I agree with much of what has been said. I mean, I worked in the private sector for 16 years, and if you were being told from the top that you had to make cuts and savings across the department, you had to know what your budgets were going to be. And I think to be fair to the civil servants, we haven't been fair to the civil servants. And we haven't been fair to arm's length bodies, and we haven't been fair to ministers that are having to deal with the issue in terms of the community sector in Northern Ireland, which is fairly sizable. There's a lesson for all of us in this, that we must agree the budgets when we need to agree the budgets, because it's impossible for people to make projections, whether they be savings or whether they be around the issue of spending, until the budgets are agreed. And failure to do that is just absolutely catastrophic in terms of trying to get to the position we want to get to of good governance here.
Chair, can I suggest as well that Irene Knox had indicated that libraries facilitate the work of a number of departments, and also made mention of the forthcoming arts and culture strategy, which will be an executive strategy, will cut across a lot of departments and will set a new sort of envelope and scenario for the arts and culture sectors moving into a situation where there's a reduced number of departments as well. Can I suggest that that's probably the direction that the committee might need to look in terms of overall consideration of funding, how that's done within a strategy? And we have time set aside today, later on, where we're going to look at that issue, and if we can move this discussion into that when we look at the broader idea of what the arts and culture strategy might well fund, and how the executive can look at this, rather than, as I said, you have institutions like libraries, you have an arm's length body like Libraries NI that is so cross-cutting that really looking at one department in terms of funding doesn't quite seem adequate. Therefore, it's going to have to be looked at in terms of whole executive. And if I can suggest we take that into the session we have later on about funding arts and culture.
Could I maybe just make a comment that, in my opinion here now, over the last 12 years, one thing I found totally frustrating and unnecessary is the fact that they leave the budgeting to too late in the year. You start that bit earlier. You don't need accelerated passes, all the panic and all the rest of it. The other one is, and this is an endemic problem, I fear, is that there is no accurately phased budgets in any department. They're all broad brush things, and you see these sort of oasis every so often, the in-year monitoring, the 3 times to get the water hole to change it. And they always save money towards the end of the year. And then some of the projects that it's used on might be a bit questionable, but they're always under pressure to spend money at the end. If they have accurately phased budgets, that means doing your homework properly, then you can monitor the progress throughout the year rather than waiting, to the 9th month of the year before you say, okay, well, I'm afraid we're not going to spend that now. The whole system needs to be radically rethought, and it's not rocket science. Everywhere else works on that sort of principle.
Yeah. Some of these things are issues right across the executive.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a culture. No pun intended.
Oliver?
Yes, sir. But it makes it also harder for the departments to plan their budgets if they are to work with outside bodies and running libraries now. For example, the councils are coming in on the 1st of April, and they still have yet to have their community plans put in place for their budgets, etc. How much money they're going to set aside for community work. So, in that sense, there it's hard for the departments and departments across the board to see how much they can actually spend to work alongside councils to get a cocktail of funding off them. So the whole thing is all over the place. And I think maybe this time next year, in the council bed in that, we will have a better idea. But that's one thing I think of things that councils were allowed to come in without a community plan. That should have been the first thing they should have been working at to the 1st of April on, but they've been allowed to, some of them are allowed to take their community plans right into 2016. Makes it harder again.
That's, fair enough saying that. The difficulty, I suppose, is just as a committee, we're not, it's more another department really, in terms of community planning. Right, we've got a list of things here to do.
Referencing that in a minute.
So we'll follow up on those, okay.
Yes, Chair, thank you.
Moves us on then to correspondence tracker on page 67. And then on page 68, we have the response from BBC NI regarding the coverage range of Radio Foyle on FM. We'll reply back there from Head of Corporate Community Affairs in Northern Ireland. We've responded on behalf of the Director General. They state the transmission area is consistent with the locality-specific nature of the content and service of Radio Foyle. BBC NI has suggested that if there are specific areas where analogue coverage is not available, that members contact them with details and the BBC distribution team will investigate. Efforts are continuing to provide BBC Foyle on digital radio, and the commissioning of a second DAB multiplex should allow for digital transmission. The BBC is soon to announce plans that will include Radio Foyle on Freeview.
Chair, radio services are available on obviously there's no picture, it's just sound.
Yes.
BBC Radio Ulster's available on that, and this is
yes.
To include Radio Foyle in that.
You get it on now.
Would you get Radio Foyle in that?
Yes.
All right. There you go.
You listen to it, and they will endeavour to keep the committee informed of these developments. So
Chair, this was particularly Mr. O'Hashin, so we can ask him if he wants to develop this issue further. We can bring that back, Chair.
Right. We note that then page 71, correspondence from the OFM DFM Committee regarding European Commission Work Programme for 2015. The OFM DFM Committee had previously issued a research paper on European Commission Work Programme 2015 to the House of Lords EU Committee. Their response has been included at page 72. Members may find this information useful when considering the committee's EU priorities later in today's meeting. And at this stage, if you're content to note that correspondence, that issue will be discussed further in the closed session. Brings us on then to next item, correspondence. And could I refer members to the investment strategy report for February 2015? In January's report considered at the meeting on the 29th of January, the Casement Park project was recorded in the in construction category with an end date of December 15. Members will note that it has now been moved to the construction not yet started category with an end date of June 2018. So are members content to note at this stage?
Great.
Thank you.
There are no items of chairperson's business.
Chair, we know we do.
Sorry, there are.
We do, Chair.
Apologies.
Chair,
I'm using the wrong one here.
We have a paper from Nipper that has been tabled.
Oh,
Members
yes,
will
sorry.
recall they met Nipper, Chair, when we did our meeting at the Linen Library at the beginning of January.
Yeah,
And Nipper have subsequently corresponded. I'm sure members will remember they had conversations with representatives from Nipper during the lunch after the meeting. They have subsequently written to the committee chair about the funding that they received.
Okay. Sorry. So they get discretionary funding of $28,000 a year from the department, which basically covers a very modest operation. They're seeking support to extend their work into electronic publication. Now, they've sent us a letter there, which you have in front of you, it's just been tabled. I think they're concerned that the impact of cuts there would be quite significant when it is such a small operation, a small amount of money. It brings us into this whole area about cultural heritage, and I mean, in a sense, they're doing a piece of work holding on to preserving core elements of our culture and heritage, things that otherwise fall through the net and get forgotten about. They've got over 10,000 items there, collecting local periodicals, it's very much local. I think they're suggesting that we would write and support them in the present and development work of Nipper by sustaining the support and investing in. Are they suggesting that we write to the department?
Chair, I get that impression that they're also, I think they're acutely aware of the fact that hard copy publication is obviously not the only mainstream way of publishing anymore, and they're looking to extend their work into electronic publication, which now obviously has reached more than a critical mass. And if they aren't collecting that, it's difficult to see where it's going to be collected. I think that the worry they have is that there's already a lot that is being lost into the ethosphere, and it's simply not being retained. It's not being catalogued. It's not being remarked on even. And they're looking to launch a project that they can start their work, with electronic publications as well as the hard copy that they already do. Now, as you've pointed out, they work on a very small budget already, and I don't think the work around electronic is going to be a huge investment or require a huge investment. They're currently doing scoping on it through very cleverly through a thesis that's being written at the University of Ulster, which is often a very good way to get something done without necessarily having to employ expensive consultants. So it might be useful to get the outcome of that University of Ulster thesis study to give a bit of an idea of what it is they need to do around electronic publications.
They Preston get 28,000 a year from that. That's
DCAL's discretionary money.
And I think their concern probably is that in the current context they get squeezed out because it's a quieter voice. Yeah. Would you be supportive of writing to the department saying that we value the work of this particular project? It's important for preserving cultural heritage in Northern Ireland, and that the discretion will be used to continue the support for it. Members are content in that regard.
Shall we write?
All right.
Where's Ford? I can deal with that.
Right.
So, Chair, Forward Work Programme, just two things I'm flagging up, as I had been the last number of weeks, is the visit this afternoon to Brain Injury Matters that you and I are undertaking. Again, I'll say to members, we had hoped to meet down there, but it didn't. The facility wasn't really going to work out for us, so we'll do that visit this afternoon and report back on that. And then the other thing is I'd sent out an outline itinerary for the visit to the Northwest for Creativity Month next week, which is kind of anchored at the Northwest Regional Science Park.
Peter, where's that itinerary? Is it?
It was tabled, Chair. There's a hard copy there.
Right, thank you.
And we depart on Wednesday at about 2 from the east door. Right. And we're aiming to get back by 4 o'clock on Thursday again. We'll have the bus. So if members let us know how they want to deal with the bus, we'll have it here from 2. We can even look at if members find it easier to meet us in the way, but I don't know how well that works necessarily with the direction we're going. But if we communicate with members on that, then we can kind of work out what our best option is. But we'll do that during the week as well, Chair.
Okay.
Chair, the other thing I should flag up is the members will recall that we're having Joanna McConway, who is head of the DCAL Northwest office, to brief us on the variety of projects that are going to be happening in the Northwest as part of UK City of Culture Legacy, and those are also in the table pack. Sorry, in the main pack. The main pack. If members want to refer to that, we did indicate that we would bring that to members as early as we possibly could, so that they would have a chance to absorb it before obviously having Joanna to brief. Joanna will also be available to talk informally to members on the evening before. She's coming to the stakeholder dinner, and I've provided a list of those people who are attending that also in the draft itinerary as well. Essentially, as I said before, it's reinforcing the committee's visit to mark Creativity Month, and they're all focused with the creative industries.
I think one of the issues there that was raised in the past was this is supposed to be legacy work. And what's a legacy? Is it a legacy that forever and a day there will be an ongoing payment of money and resources into that area? Or what does this mean? Because when you got to the sporting, well, yes, some sporting groups up there got money, but then they could they apply to others as well? Was it a double opportunity? There's a lack of clarity around that Northwest legacy.
Chair, I'm hoping the paper that Joanna has forwarded goes into more depth than we've had before in terms of the different project strands in the Northwest. And I'm hopeful that being able to engage directly with Joanna, she'll now be in a position to give us much more detail on that, which is one of the key reasons for having her come to the meeting.
I think what Peter said is right. It's important we get that because, I mean, even when you had the then Chief Executive of the Council and the Chief Executive of the organisation that was put together to oversee the whole year and the build-up to it, I was never convinced that that was particularly joined up. And I think even at times during evidence to this committee, that manifested itself. And so, it's important that happens because there's a huge amount of money and resource. There was a discussion the other night in the chamber about competing constituencies within this city in terms of investment. There are many constituencies who receive much less investment than, for example, Foyle gets. We need to be sure that the division of money across departments, across government and across Northern Ireland is fair and equitable.
If you look on the last page, page 100, it says there will be a further commitment to support refurbishment projects. This commitment has been made for Springtown, Oakleaf, St Joseph's and Eglinton boxing clubs for the 15-16 financial year. Well, we had the issue the other week, last week, of boxing, the pressures that there are. How do we get to the point where other areas have opportunity, or is this? I mean, how much has been set aside for this? We don't know.
That's right. Go on, stick it.
Yes, Oliver.
Sir, well, what we're talking about here, we're having a mini inquiry here over one word: legacy. And if we take it to that conclusion, we could use this word legacy in a whole lot of things if we wanted to drill down into the whole thing. And it's interesting, and I'm very pleased to hear that we're talking about equality here across the board for everybody. That's the first time I've heard it mentioned, and it is to be welcome when I heard it. But bear in mind, there's a rural proofing bill coming before the Assembly, and when we use the word legacy, we automatically dive into the financial side of things. And I think that's sometimes wrong. It could blinker our thinking if we're going to progress the arts or culture at all. We must look at it from that point of view. Obviously, finance is vitally important, but we can't look at it as a non-year. What you're saying there, Chair, what are they getting every year? This doesn't say this. And we're going back to the boxing again. Boxing, it's been very, very clear. Those who were looking for funding applied. And those who were trying to apply, they got help to apply. And we were told the last day there was other clubs did not even apply or ask for help. So we can't keep drilling down into boxing to make those examples. We must try and move this on a little bit. And if there is a question there on legacy, then why don't yourself and the clerk, that's only a suggestion, Chair, go and sit with the department and ask them what do they mean by the word legacy, without drilling it, without turning it, people perceive as a mini inquiry the word legacy.
Well, I think the issues was raised not by me but by another member of the committee on a previous occasion, and I think it's right and proper then that the matter is dealt with through the committee to give the committee its proper place and respect. And I'm simply raising today the point that on page 100 it says a further commitment to support refurbishment projects has been made for the 15-16 financial year. Now, this is a year when there are serious financial pressures. All we're asking for, I think, at least I'm suggesting we ask for, is that we ask, what is this further commitment? How much is involved? Because it's simply say there is a commitment. Is it £50,000, £500,000? What is it? And I think it would be helpful to have that information. Or, yes, William?
Yeah, I think Mr. McMullen makes a valid point in terms of legacy. You know, it can't just be about money. That's exactly the point. That it can't be just about money. Let's see tangible reasons and benefit and outcomes and outputs of the investment that there has been significant investment both by regional government and local government in the city of Londonderry in the run-up to and during the Year of Culture. Equality is something I have in my entirety since I was elected always sought, always will. No one should fear equality across government at all. So I'm totally and consistent in that. In terms of the boxing, I will continue to drill down on the boxing. And in terms of funding, I mentioned last week here when Sport and I were here that there were some clubs in my constituency who got funding who asked for it from Sport and I. That's not an issue. The issue is that there is a funding stream clearly within the department for a boxing club in a area within a tight geographical area, and no one else, no other club has been able to access that, and I want to see equality implemented there too.
Russell?
Just to say, you know, this issue about legacy being a word, what I originally was worried about, it was a catch-all, because people sort of thought, well, we did have a big City of Culture thing, that's good, and we want to do some legacy, that sounds good. But then what you find is there was an open-ended commitment to all sorts of things. And I mean, I sit and say, I make no apologies about asking the question. I just look at page 99. It says, contribution to refurb a building adjacent to Irish Language Centre in partnership with DSD, £150,000. Now, I don't know whether that's 10% of the project or 50% of the project, and it was something that last week we were looking at a building beside that building, and it just seems to me that there's quite a bit of work being done that is being chopped up into small pieces so that it's hard to actually keep track of things. And the final thing I will say about legacy, I have no problem if we agree that we're going to put some funding for legacy, but when I look and see does this mean that certain areas of Northern Ireland are getting advantage over access to facilities? You know, I am looking here just above it at digital specialist equipment for outer north, outer west. You go down all of these things. I wonder if there's similar provision for Dromore in my constituency or Lisburn in my constituency, because I'm not sure that that's legacy, that's an investment. So I'm not against it, I just think we shouldn't have it open-ended, and it is absolutely proper we should ask the questions.
We'll hopefully get some of that information next Thursday from Joanna, and I mean, this has been provided in the way of information, and that's helpful, but it doesn't really go far enough insofar as, for example, a further commitment, but we don't know what it is.
Chair, I think having Joanna there might be very useful because it'll be interactive and there will be an opportunity then to drill down and explore things.
The only difficulty then is, in the course of a conversation, something's said, and A remembers it one way, B remembers it another, and if it's down a bit of paper, could we ask her, or could you have a word with her, in the light of today's conversation, to maybe email us in advance of the visit next week, some additional information so that we're all clear where this is.
Can I just return to the point? I think I recall, just from your point, that what we were really asking for at the last meeting was, if there is a strategic plan, we'd like to know what that strategic plan is. It's not a list of, these are things that we're doing. Is there a plan, and how much money is associated with it? Is that in there somewhere? I mean, maybe I've missed it.
What we'd asked for was the strategy, and what Joanna has sent is this series of programmes and projects. There's a decal-led, obviously Northwest Legacy. Then there's an executive Northwest strategy as well. The decal feeds into another departments are there as well. I do think it's probably most productive to explore this as part of the briefing next week when we actually have the lead official there to drill down.
If there's an executive Northwest strategy, and if there's a decal Northwest element within that, could we get then copies of these things so that we actually know how long is this going to run. We know what was put in the year in the United Kingdom Year of Culture, but what has been put in since then, and what is planned to be put in, and will we still at this in 3015?
I think, Chair, this is the important thing. We need to get the whole picture now. I have no problem with UK City of Cultural Legacy, but it has to be specified what it is. And what you have here are a series of revenue streams that are going in there, and I don't think we have a handle on all of them. And when you look even at what's been supplied this morning, we'll see, for example, there a socio-economic development programme, you know, of 200,000. You know, what's that got to do with the City of Cultural Legacy? You know, so this is a DSD issue, or perhaps a DETI issue. So if we could have that whole picture. A reminder too that when we were scanning through the budgets earlier, we found out that there was something like £600,000 through the arts budget as well, through the arm's length body of decal, also for the City of Culture. So we really do need to get the whole picture so we know what's going on and can follow it.
And what useful to have then on in the one document, like half a page setting down, here's what happened financially in 2000 and whatever the year was, and then moving on after that and looking forward for the next year or two. Is this something that is it just going to run up until the election at the end of the Assembly, or is this something beyond that? What is in it? What is going to be spent over the next year? Because at a point where we're closing libraries right across the province, in every not closing libraries, sorry, we're cutting hours in libraries. Sorry,
you should clarify that. Yeah. People watching.
Panic there, panic.
Sorry, no, I'm not cutting that. We're cutting hours in libraries. Well, we're not. The department is. Sorry?
Do you know something?
No, if I did.
No, can we stress that this is clarifying that what Irene said?
We're cutting the hours.
For the benefit of the tape.
For the benefit of the tape. Where we're cutting the department's cutting the hours in libraries across the province. And yet somehow or other it's possible to produce money for a range of things here in one particular area, and that only creates resentment in other areas where they say, well, look, my library's not open for as many hours, or whatever the impact is. But it's that feeling of that there isn't equality, that there is some sort of preferential treatment.
Chair, we'll take away the conversation today, and we'll talk to lead officials in the department, and we'll bring back what we can next week, and we'll talk to Joanna about what more she can provide and what parameters she's aware of. We'll bring that.
Right, okay, we'll get that information for next week. Information's always helpful. Brings us forward then to any other business anybody has? No.
None has been highlighted, just Chair, if there's no other.
So we're moving into closed session.
Is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.